Just a little preface. This takes place in 1978. If you weren't born by then, just hum to yourself, do a little dance, make a little love, get down tonight. I'm driving down a road in Oklahoma. For miles, there is nothing, nothing but flat, endless Oklahoma. My mother, who normally talks continuously for a 12-hour period, is snoring quietly in the passenger seat. We have been driving forever. Our next stop is Oklahoma City. I am 22 years old and I am moving to California from the frozen tundra of Buffalo, New York. My mother, who can't bear to see me grow up and leave home, has decided to martyr herself once more and accompany me on this trip across country. I know she's really taking this trip because she needs to worry about me up until the last possible moment. She worries that I'll become an adult, make my own decisions, and learn to cook my own meals. She also worries that I'll wear patent leather shoes after Labor Day, make long-distance phone calls before the rates go down, and shop for groceries without coupons. There is only one stipulation to her joining me. We must make this 3,000-mile drive in 4 days. My mother needs to go to a wedding the following weekend back in New York. This makes me laugh to myself. Never a bridesmaid, never a bride. But that's another story. I look over at my mother and notice she's in a deep sleep. I'm not surprised that she's so tired. She's had a trucker's mentality throughout our little adventure. As we cross into different time zones, my mother seems to purposely ignore the fact that we gain an hour each time. Every morning, like a drill sergeant, she gets me out of bed at what she pretends is 4 a.m., but what I know is 3 a.m. There's no point in arguing with her. She's determined to set a new record for driving cross-country in a Datsun station wagon. I slowly push down on the gas pedal, bringing our speed to 90 miles an hour. I just want to get in a hot bath and wash off all this dust and tedium of Oklahoma. My mother begins to stir, and I consider slowing down a little, but then again, she wants this to be a quick trip, so I continue to speed. She asks where we are, and I tell her that we're about an hour outside of Oklahoma City. I stare at the seemingly endless road ahead of me. There is nothing around us but cattle skulls and tumbleweeds. The only music we can get on the radio is country western, or some religious maniac who yells at us about Satan. I feel like I'm in the neurotic Jewish version of Bonanza. We decide to pull into a truck stop and eat something. As we walk into the diner, all the men tip their cowboy hats at us. I'm not quite sure what we're supposed to do in response. I consider curtsying, but that's probably not right. So I just smile and follow my mother to a table. The waitress is a caricature of all the waitresses you see in movies about diners like this. She has an enormous blonde bouffant, too much makeup, and calls us y'all. We look over the menu, and I don't recognize anything. I make the assumption that there is no chance for me to get a lean corned beef sandwich on rye with a seltzer. The breakfast choices look relatively safe, so I order eggs, grits, biscuits, and red-eye gravy. I have no idea what red-eye gravy is, but when in Rome, forget about cholesterol. After dinner, we get back on the road, and this time my mother is driving. This part has been a challenge, since my mother has no idea how to drive a stick shift. We didn't discover this until we were halfway through Indiana and we were switching drivers for the first time. My mother figured it would be easy. She'd hold down the clutch, and I'd shift. I'm afraid I'll need a new transmission by the time we hit New Mexico. As we get back into what seems to be the only highway in Oklahoma, my mother shifts from second into fourth. I cringe, but say nothing. Soon I'll be 3,000 miles away from her, and none of this will matter. We'll pull into a motel about an hour later. It's 7 p.m., and I immediately fall asleep. I know I have a 3 a.m. wake-up call from my sadistic morning person of a mother. No matter how many hours of sleep I get, 3 a.m. still feels like 3 a.m. Cold, dark, and too damn early. We begin day 3 at high speeds. We need to cover a lot of road today. I listen to country western music until the lyrics begin to depress me too much. No one ever seems happy in those songs. Someone is either cheating or lying, or someone's dog dies. No wonder Oklahoma looks like it does. My mother has been silent for an inordinate amount of time. She looks over at me and without warning asks, "Are you a lesbian?" Now remember, I'm driving 90 miles an hour. And this is not the sort of thing you ask someone who is driving 90 miles an hour. I mean, she couldn't have waited till we were at a stoplight. I pull the car over to the side of the road, turn off the engine, and reply, yes. We look at each other for a split second, and my mother starts to cry. I hadn't planned on this little conversation, but then again, my mother has had her finger on my pulse since the day I was born. She has always sensed any change in my life, any emotional turmoil I was grappling with. How could I not expect her to know that I've been sleeping with Catherine? It's Catherine, isn't it? She asked me. Yep, it's Catherine. Catherine was my first girlfriend. We began seeing each other at the end of my senior year in college. She was my boyfriend's ex-girlfriend. Already, I was learning the basics of dyke drama. So does this mean you'll always be a lesbian? Before I can reply, I think to myself, how can I even begin to answer this question? At this point, I've only been a lesbian for about 6 months. I know I've done well on the oral exam, but what about the essay? Mom, I'm moving to a city where I know absolutely no one. I have no job and no apartment. I just can't think that far ahead. Please do me a favor. Don't tell the rest of the family until I've had a chance to settle in and think things through. My mother reluctantly agrees to my request. When we arrive in Albuquerque, we check into our motel, and I tell my mother everything. She looks at me for a moment and tells me she always thought I was a little different. I never liked girls' toys. I used to wear a full-dress Marine uniform when I was 5. When I wasn't in a uniform, I always wore some type of hat. An airplane pilot cap, a Foreign Legion hat, a Civil War Yankee soldier's cap, or a space helmet. At all time, I was ready for a trip to the moon or to defend my house against bad people. I honestly don't know if my wardrobe attributed to my lesbianism, but I had a lot more fun with my hats and uniforms than I ever could have with Barbie and Ken. Our trip ends and I'm emotionally and physically exhausted. Although my mother and I are ready to separate, we have a very tearful goodbye at the airport. I drive away from the terminal confused and relieved. My life is about to begin, and my new apartment complete with rented furniture. It's 1978, and everything in my apartment is in earth tones. I have brown and orange shag carpeting, brown and orange furniture, brown and orange linens, and even a brown phone. It's like living in a Denny's. What was I thinking? One day, my mother calls to see if I'm still eating a balanced diet and to tell me that she has outed me to the entire family. I'm angry, but a little relieved at the same time. My father thinks the hats and uniforms are the problem. My 16-year-old brother doesn't really understand, and my grandmother points out that Gertrude Stein was not only a brilliant lesbian, but she was also Jewish. So now I'm out to the family, but my mother is still trying to take care of me. In her eyes, the umbilical cord stretches over 4 time zones. For a brief moment, I consider changing my phone number. After a few minutes, I realize that I'm in my own apartment with my own things and my own food choices in the kitchen. I laugh to myself as I prepare cold cereal for dinner.
Liz Morrison.